That is what I really enjoy about seeing things globally, is that nobody has the answer and everybody has a piece of the answer. The fact of the matter is, in every community, there is somebody that's trying to improve the human condition.
This is where it all begins, so say goodbye to all your fears, all your doubts. This is where they die. This is where we come to win, we come to fly. This is where we make our dreams come to life. Welcome to Innovation City.
Welcome to Innovation City, a podcast featuring the innovators, disruptors, and creators who are breaking through the status quo to change the way that business happens today. My name is Tyler Kelly. I'm here with my co-host, Michael Johnson and Travis Sheridan. How are you guys doing?
Doing well.
Doing good.
So today we really want to give you some insight into what Innovation City is all about, what our purpose is, what our vision for the show is, where we see ourselves headed, and how that affects you, what's in it for you as a listener.
We are incredibly excited about Innovation City, and I think the story of how Innovation City started is kind of interesting because it started over drinks with these three people. So one of I think the amazing things about Innovation City is that we really get to bring people who really are breaking through that status quo. And I think a lot of that has to do with, I know that all of it has to do with our partnership with Venture Cafe. And really a lot of that has to do with Travis.
Oh, shucks.
Travis, why don't you give us some of the background just on what Venture Cafe is about?
Yeah, so first of all, I love the name Innovate. I'm going to just say I love the name Innovation City because people will automatically assume this must be a podcast about San Francisco or Boston or London, and they'll be wrong, which is great because I think that'll be really cool. So Venture Cafe is this global organization that I have the honor of running, and in each city that we're in, we have a local operation. And so we have Venture Cafe in St. Louis and Miami, Florida, and Rotterdam, Netherlands, and Tokyo, Japan. And the whole premise is an opportunity to connect innovators to make things happen, right? The belief in our hearts and in our minds, especially around that word innovation, is that innovation is a process to improve the human condition. Life is better when we innovate, and we have to break down these different silos and have innovators from different disciplines all serendipitously colliding in order for that to happen. And sometimes we do it over drinks because that's a great way to relax people.
That's really cool. When we first started talking about the show, it was just an idea to do something in terms of collaboration. And I really think the future of media just in general is collaboration. So this show is really exciting because we see the power of collaboration. And so the guests that we have on this show that we've been fortunate to interview and get to meet, these are people that are defining innovation through diversity, inclusion, community, creativity. They're doing things that have never been done before, and they're disrupting and creating new things that didn't exist before. It's been a really fun experience and rewarding experience to talk to some of these people. I can't wait to share it with the rest of the listening audience.
Yeah, and Travis, I think you working for Venture Cafe probably have one of the coolest jobs that one could have.
Well, when I ran Venture Cafe St. Louis, I said I had the best job in St. Louis. Now that I run Venture Cafe Global, I have the best job on the planet. So yeah, best job ever.
Yeah, because every time I look at your Instagram feed, you are just at some amazing place. And I'm pretty jealous of all the places you get to go.
Well, my primary responsibility is really twofold. So I guess that would be primary and secondary. But I really focus on us expanding Venture Cafe to new markets. I mentioned some of the places we're already in. We're launching in Tokyo. Tokyo launches this year. We are launching in Dublin in a few years. I'm going down to Sydney, Australia. We're going to be in Philadelphia. And a lot of these cities that we're going into are what I would call second-tier cities. Even though Tokyo has 35 million people, it's not known as Innovation City. The place where we really want to engage people are these places that when we mention their name, you turn your head and go, there? Really? And what's so amazing is there are great innovators. There are people busting through the status quo every single day. And what they're leveraging is this global opportunity to democratize innovation. It is no longer relegated to the coasts or to big cities. Innovation happens anywhere and everywhere.
So that's really interesting. And I'm just curious how Venture Cafe finds those places. Because it seems to me like pretty good at predicting where innovation is going to happen. So how does that work?
So a little city pops up on my phone and I swipe left or swipe right. No, I'm just kidding. That should be an app though. No, oftentimes cities will reach out to us, and they reach out because they've experienced Venture Cafe somewhere else. So a delegation of leadership from maybe a university or economic development or corporations or startup community will visit Boston or St. Louis or somewhere else, and they may pop into Venture Cafe and then realize this sounds kind of cool. How do we get this in our city? And that's usually the first way that we're introduced. But we also know that we have a list of about 50 cities that we want to be in the next 7 to 10 years. And they range from these second tier cities up to including the New Yorks and the San Franciscos and the Tel Avivs of the world.
For somebody who's listening to this that like has an idea they want to try, it's all about recognizing an opportunity like before it's even happening. So it seems to me that Venture Cafe is good at doing that, but how can like the average person recognize an opportunity and just like pounce on it? What should they look for?
I think whenever anybody has like that light bulb moment or that heartburn that says, I want to create something, I always ask people this question. I'm like, what are your aspirations, right? When you think of this idea, how far do you want to carry it, right? When you think of an idea for a podcast, is it we want to do this as a single season, or we want to do this so that it's picked up by a large platform? Like, what are those aspirations? But when it comes to seizing opportunity, not only are aspirations important, but what's the community that's going to support you? Not who's going to buy it, but what's the community that's going to support you? And there are 3 words that I think people try to use interchangeably, but they're different: network, ecosystem, and community. And when you have this idea that pops up, first you think, oh, how can I leverage my network? Or where does this fit in an ecosystem? The real answer is, how can I get my community behind this and to support me? And I think that as people that have experienced Venture Cafe, they've realized it's not about networking. It's not even about a petri dish in an ecosystem. It really is about, I am part of a community that's supportive.
And, for those of you who are not in a Venture Cafe city yet, Venture Cafe is the largest weekly gathering of innovators who are making things happen. And I think I've probably been, at this point, 70 times.
I'm somewhere in the 60s, I think.
Yeah.
So creeping up on 100, that's nice.
We're getting there. I mean, I still feel like a rookie at times, right? But it's really, the place is very dynamic, and in being able to travel to Venture Cafes outside of my home city, Venture Cafe, I find it interesting and encouraging that you've built a brand that draws in a very similar type of person, regardless of the cities not necessarily being the same.
Yeah, let me ask you that. I mean, you've attended different Venture Cafes. Have you noticed some similarities, like in
Totally.
the ethos and the culture of them?
Totally, yeah.
Okay, cool.
As soon as, you could be in a city like Miami that has a major Latin influence, a Cuban-American influence. It's a very international city. A lot of Asians and Europeans are converging into Miami. But then you walk in, and so it's very different for Midwest guys like us, right?
Yeah.
And so you walk into the CIC building there, you walk into Venture Cafe on a Thursday night, and it feels, to me, like I'm at home in St. Louis, because it's the same type of people.
Yeah.
We can go in and we can have the same conversations that we would have with people in St. Louis, feel as welcomed, and then carry on those conversations afterward to the next spot and actually build some friendships.
So I want to ask you about innovation, the name Innovation City, because the thing that I like about the name of this podcast, and really the emphasis behind this podcast, is that going back to what cities are comprised of. Cities are not comprised of ecosystems and networks. Cities are comprised of communities, right? So as this is rolling out, and for the listeners to plan ahead, how does this help them relate to their city, wherever they might be? They might not be in a Venture Cafe place. They may not be one of the innovators that are interviewed. How does this relate to what they want to do in their own city and build their community?
Yeah, I mean, I think a key to that is you talked about like networks and you talked about infrastructure. I think that's the word you used, infrastructure.
Yeah.
Was that the word you used?
I might have.
Okay.
I use it sometimes.
But those are just like
ecosystem.
Yeah, ecosystem. That's what I'm
ecosystem.
looking for.
Yeah.
Those are just like physical things that exist. I could debate ecosystem could be living.
Yeah.
But like the other things are just like a physical construct. Whereas I feel like community, I mean, humans are a lot more complicated than just system. There's something that makes us human and something that connects us to each other. And I think as we record this podcast, like that's really the goal is we can learn all about this person's business, but what I want to know is like what makes that person tick? Why are they doing what they're doing? Like what's their vision for the world? Because it's way more than just A plus B equals C. There's a human element.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's actually a tough question because I think the short answer is that for someone who's listening that isn't in a city that, let's say that they don't know that innovation is happening, because I do believe that innovation is happening in cities across the world, even if we're not aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so for that person that is in their city that is wishing, desiring for an innovation community to pop up, my hope is that this show shows them that there are people like them out there and that they just need to, open their eyes and get out of their house and take a look around their city, because there's a lot. There's a community of people that are rising up, breaking through the status quo. I think it's changing the face of America and the world.
Mm-hmm.
This is the next generation that I would say is now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty exciting.
Well, and I think that as I look at this construct of cities and the role of innovation, and as people are listening to this, it's one thing for a person to be invited to things, invited to participate in this whole innovation world. It's another thing to actually give them access to it. Mm. And the people that are interviewed on this show are all people that either, if they didn't get access, they made access. Like they broke. When you're busting through the status quo, you don't wait for permission, you just go through. But once you do go through, you bring others along with you. Like when some of these guests that have been interviewed, when they reach a certain level of success, they look back and bring others along with them, which is really what is the importance of community, right? That's how things really grow and thrive.
Yeah, it's an amazing storyline over and over again, just as humans. When we see somebody that we can relate to, that's done it, that's made it, it gives us hope that we can do the same. And what's interesting about the guests that we've interviewed so far for the show is that these aren't the typical, this isn't what you would expect in terms of just like what you see on the news, in terms of a successful person. By every right, these people are beyond successful. But at first glance, it's not what the news and the media and that storyline that culture gives us is successful. And so it's nice to see that diversity, that inclusion, that the people that are not given, the silver spoon, like you said, breaking through, because that's what it takes. And so people who have an idea, who have a desire to do something greater than what they're doing now, really it's the advice that everyone gives is just like take that first step, be consistent, and don't take no for an answer.
Yeah, I really appreciate people who don't play around with the idea of failure. And there's so much that we see in publications that say, celebrate failure. Failure is good. For most people in this country or in this world, if you fail, you could die, right? Your family could be out of their house. Like failure is not a luxury. Celebrating it is reserved for the privileged and safety nets and those types of things. But the people that are really living and breathing innovation in their cities, that are really trying to break through the status quo, they're taking tremendous risks. Right? They're not necessarily venture backed, right? They don't have inheritance or a trust fund that they're banking on. That's the people that you've interviewed. These are people that are putting everything on the line: drastic career changes, turning down six-figure salaries, or turning down great opportunities because they want to pursue their passion and they want to be a model for other people. And there's that adage: if you can't see it, you can't be it. Well, I guess in this case, if you can't hear it, you can't be it, right? All these people have different pathways and different perspectives that I think the listeners will be able to relate to, which I think is, of course, always important when you're doing storytelling.
Mm-hmm. And for the listening and viewing audience on YouTube and iTunes video, we're going to have, in addition to the interviews that we do live from St. Louis and Miami and maybe at a future time from somewhere else in the world, but in addition to that, Travis is kind of, Travis, like Michael said, is a traveler. He gets to travel and get paid for it. And so he is going to have an opportunity to get in front of some very compelling people and possibly do some like on the road interviews with those people. And so from time to time, Innovation City will be on the road, let's say, right?
Yeah, and I think that what we'll do as we're talking to people in different cultures, right? I'm hitting a stretch where, and this is not uncommon, I'm going to do 5 continents in 5 weeks. I'm going to be in Tokyo and Sydney and Cape Verde, in Africa and Rotterdam, Netherlands, and then back in the U.S. to see my lovely wife for at least a week. But when I'm talking to people, what others will realize and recognize is that there are more similarities than differences, right? The story of innovation that each person tells, as you listen to it, you'll be able to identify a common theme. So I want to ask you, like, what are some common themes that you anticipate people hearing and taking away from this?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the number one themes that we've kind of touched on already a little bit is just the way people think that, I think there's this idea that success brings up the people around you. And I think, as Tyler was talking about earlier, there's this idea of the stereotypical successful person. And I think a lot of times what the media portrays as success is this is a person with a lot of money and maybe they did something wrong to get there, or, the people around them are worse off because they've taken something. And this is like, I have zero of that experience in my career as an entrepreneur, or zero of that experience meeting anybody at Venture Cafe. Like, everybody has been interested in the success of the people around them in their communities. And I really think the number one thing is if one person is successful, the people around them are better for it. I think that's a really big thing that we see.
Yeah, and I mean, that's humanity, right? So, and it's the way that the ecosystem works. Like, I'm always reminded of flowers. A flower, when it blooms, emits a sound that none of us can hear, but the other flowers can hear it. And what
are they all celebrating? Like, yeah.
Well, what it does is, like, when that one blooms, then the others, like, they hear it and they bloom as well. So that's why, like, in your backyard, you'll see, like, they all, like, sort of bloom, like, around the same time. And it's all based on, like, the example of the one.
Yeah.
So I think that's just really, it's just the way that the world works.
Yeah.
And so then that's what's cool about media in general, like online media, like getting this story out to as many people as we possibly can, because we can multiply the effects of these stories hundreds and thousands and hopefully millions of times over to have an effect that we can't even measure. So I think that's pretty exciting.
No, that also makes me think, so you asked us about just the difference between St. Louis and Miami, but as you travel the world, like Rotterdam, Tokyo, Africa, some of those places, do you see the same similarities in people?
No. I mean, the people are very different, right? The people. I mean, that's the beauty of this world. Our people they approach things from different perspectives. If I take, and this is not to overgeneralize, this is just about some characteristics. If I take my colleagues in Rotterdam, the Dutch, they are very direct. I've sat through board meetings and seen people raked over the coals, and I felt uncomfortable. And I was a board member. I'm like, I feel uncomfortable for you. But they were it's professional. It's very direct. Whereas, and then if you think of Japan, which is much more hierarchical, and the whole premise of saving face and not shaming anybody, like those are very different cultures and different communities. How do you innovate in each of those spaces? The fact of the matter is, in every community, there is somebody that's trying to improve the human condition. Like how that manifests itself, how it really rolls out might be different. In Holland, the way that you improve the human condition is that you call BS when you see BS. Like that, you fix it right away.
Yeah.
In Tokyo, maybe it's about creating a more complex structure in the long term to improve the human condition, not for today, but for generations. And that is what I really enjoy about seeing things globally, is that nobody has the answer and everybody has a piece of the answer. And things that are developed in each market can be shared with the other markets. And maybe one day we'll have a more complex answer. Maybe that will be at the end of all these podcasts, we'll say, oh, we could take all these pieces and like put it together like a beautiful mosaic. We don't know, but what we do know is that the people that are driving innovation in each of these places are driving it to improve their city and to connect globally.
Now let me ask you this, because this seems off topic, but it's not. But do you have a background in any sort of musical? Are you musical at all?
So for the listeners that remember Happy Days, Richie Cunningham played the saxophone, and he had a cute girlfriend. And so in third grade, I decided to play the saxophone because I thought it would get me a cute girlfriend. failed miserably.
Yeah.
And then, like many people that grew up in the 80s and 90s, that I played there was a stint where I was a bass player in a contemporary Christian band. And I failed miserably at that as well. I thought because a bass guitar only had 4 strings, it just meant it was easier.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the case. You still have to actually know music.
Yeah, you still have to. It's just that much more imperative that you do
Yeah, but
your
why'd you
job
ask?
right.
That's an interesting
Well, I was
question.
just curious because I was thinking we're talking about this idea of collaboration, and I think my background, I have a musical background
Yeah.
as well. I may have
No, not as well. Like you have a musical background. I listen to iTunes.
Yeah, I may have also played instruments in a contemporary Christian band a long time ago. And Tyler's got some background in music as well. You did some DJing and things like that. But I think the interesting thing is, we were talking about this mindset idea, and hopefully this isn't a tangent that doesn't make any sense. But growing up as a guitar player and seeing where the music industry goes, you see people that are really into their craft, and then they look at an album and they go well, this new album, there's 25 album credits and it took 8 people to write this song and all this stuff. When back in the 60s, there was one person that wrote the song and they recorded all the instruments. And that's totally cool. That's great. But at the same time, that person that's remixing all these things is creating new opportunities for so many people. And I think it's just a different thing, and they're good on their own levels. But I think really that's a similar thing that we find to what's happening at Venture Cafe. You talk about this remixing idea all the time. Collaborations bring more opportunity to everybody.
Remix and collaboration.
But a lot of that, you talk about a lot of that is how we've built our business, is taking, this is what we know from here and this is what we know from over here. And we've talked a little bit about what you do, but Tyler and I and a couple other people started an agency that creates media and shares it with people, among some other things we do. And I think a lot of it was based on these same ideas. What can we take that we know from all these people? Where can we take the best ideas? Who can we collaborate with? And let's just make something.
It's kind of this process of stacking. So for the innovators out there, you, in my opinion, you're not going to have a successful launch or a sustainable business if it's just one thing. Really, the Ubers of the world, they're stacking. So Uber, it's ride sharing, social media. There's all these different things that are hot right now that they're stacking on top of one another. So the more things that you can stack, the better opportunity you have to have something that's hot.
Well, we're moving away from, we're a couple of generations away from specialists, right? We're much more into the world of generalists now. And yes, I would say, in the 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, one person could master the entire album. It might be one person that's the songwriter and the singer and the instrumentalist and does the production on the back end. But today, we find the best person for each thing. And if you think about how a city is built, right? I am not an urban planner, so I'm probably getting a lot of this wrong. But a city is a combination of a lot of collaborations. The person that takes care of the streets is not the same person that takes care of the street lights. They're two different things. And when we're building out innovation districts and innovation communities, we're building them in partnership with universities, with the corporates, with the startup community. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, corporations would never play in the startup space. That's just not their thing. They have a certain process. They have their product launch and their product, pathway. They don't get involved in startups, and startups wouldn't necessarily engage with corporations. We're seeing a lot of these things blend now, and those collaborations really just accelerate innovation. That's why it can happen outside of San Francisco and New York now, is people caught the secret. Listeners, here's the thing. There's nothing secretive about Venture Cafe. We've just found a way to bring different people together. And when they collaborate, they're oh, why don't we do this more often? Well, you can. You just can.
That's cool. So, listeners, very important note here. Obviously, you found episode 000, and we would like to think that you're already a fan. And if that's the case, we need you to do 4 things. Number 1 is subscribe. Very important. If you're on iTunes, Spotify, if you're on YouTube, follow us. Click the bell for notifications. But number 1, whatever platform or device you're listening on, Stitcher, we're everywhere where their podcasts are, or we will be. Subscribe. That's very important because that helps the algorithms that iTunes and the different channels have. It helps them to notice us, to push us further up to the top so that other people can discover the podcast. So that's number 1, subscribe. Number 2 is review. those reviews are also a very important part of the algorithm. So
Even bad reviews?
I'm pretty sure all reviews
All right, yeah.
help.
If
but,
you hate
but we
it,
only
let
want
us
good
know.
reviews. We only want good reviews. But honestly, like if you have some constructive criticism, some advice, just some feedback, we'd love that too. We want to make a show that is beneficial for you, the listener, the viewer. And so if there's something that you'd like to see, let us know in the comments on YouTube or in a review or something to that matter. So rate when you're able to on the different networks, rate the show.
Rating is the easiest thing.
Thing to do. And then if you're a super fan, share. I mean, just share it. Share the web address, innovationcity.co. That's the easiest way to get to all the different networks that we're on. It's the easiest URL to send people to. So share, like, tweet, all of these things. The most important things are to download, subscribe, rate, and review. Those are the 4 things. Download, subscribe, rate, and review, because that will help us get to the top so that we can introduce this idea of innovation and connecting innovators through the medium of podcasting to more and more people. So thank you in advance for doing that.
So if you're listening to this, I know that you are an avid podcast listener because this is episode 000. So right now we've got 3 amazing episodes you can listen to. And then for the first week, we're going to have a daily episode as well. And then after that, our regular schedule will be Tuesdays and Thursdays. So make sure you come back and check out whenever there's a new episode.
So people can binge 3,
Yeah.
daily for 7 days, and then twice a week.
Yeah.
Nice. That's digestible. Yeah, get you into a rhythm.
Is that a good rhythm?
It's a good rhythm.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
So Travis, really appreciate you coming today, hanging out with us and hosting our first episode with us. We are incredibly excited about who we're going to meet and who we've already met just through the Venture Cafe network of people. I think one of the things, this whole thing started just from a serendipitous collision, the Venture Cafe. Like somebody told us, hey, you need to check it out. And there's free beer there and you can meet cool people. So that's how it started. And we've become huge fans of Venture Cafe and what they're
You've
doing.
become part of the community. I mean,
Yeah.
you are part of the community. Yeah.
We love it.
We do love it. And for those of you that are in St. Louis, Miami, Boston, Winston-Salem.
Yeah.
and
Netherlands,
Rotterdam,
Tokyo.
And Tokyo.
Any Thursday, check out Venture Cafe. We'd
Check
love
it
to
out.
have you. And I love that this is episode 000 and there are 3 of us. That means there's like a giant goose egg for each of us.
3 zeros.
Yeah, we'll take them all.
Thank you for listening to Innovation City. Remember, download, subscribe, rate, and review, and give us your feedback. Thanks again.
For more episodes, visit innovationcity.co. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. If you're in St. Louis, visit us on a Thursday night. You can find details at vincafstl.org. You can also connect with us on social at WeAreSlam or at Venture Cafe STL.
This is where it all begins, so say goodbye to all your fears, all your doubts. This is where they die. This is where we come to win, we come to fly. This is where we make our dreams